Welcome everyone to the second event in our series, which is going to be focused all around building the deposit. So we've got the same speakers as last week. We've got Joe, who is the home buy coach, who's been a mortgage broker. He's been involved in the finance industry since 2007. We've got Peter, our head of advice here at Multiply, who's had 26 years worth of experience in the world of advice. Dan, who's a financial advisor here at Multiply, who's had 15 years of experience, and myself, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Multiply, and I've been a financial advisor for nearly 3 years now. But prior to that, I spent a lot of time in the world of finance. In terms of what we're going to cover today, we're going to kick off with a very quick recap of the last session, which I'll be doing. And then Peter's going to be taking us through setting your target. This is going to be interactive. So Dan has posted a link on the chat channel. That's going to be the website that we're going to be asking everyone to use. And we're going to be asking everyone to kind of set their target as we go along. We're then going to be going on to making a plan to reach that target. So Peter's going to be taking us through that. He's then going to be passing it over to me, where I'm going to go through the top tips we have for saving your deposit. And these are really the things that we've seen help our customers. There's just going to be kind of 3 tips that we're going to run through. And then finally, Joe is going to run through what if you can't afford it. So what if you've gone through this process, you've set your target, and you can't necessarily afford it straight off the bat, and you have to kind of think of different things you can do in order to afford what you want to afford. We're going to be taking questions as we go along, just like last time. We felt that worked really well. Dan's going to be helping out, kind of answering questions as we go along, and then from time to time we're going to be answering some of them live. But we are also looking to, as with last time, looking to spend maybe 10 to 15 minutes at the end running through questions as well. Okay, let's jump straight in because we've got a huge amount to cover. Right, so recapping the foundations from last time, there were 4 key areas from the last session. The first was around debts and just making sure that you're paying off debts that are kind of bad debts that could hinder your ability to borrow, that could hinder your ability to get a mortgage. There was an example we ran through last week that Joe took us through. But the really important thing is to make sure that the debts that you have going into your home buying journey are manageable, and you prioritize paying any kind of high interest debts off. The second is around building an emergency fund. This is so, it's almost inevitable that there will be shocks as you go along the way, along your home buyer journey. If you've got an emergency fund or you're building it up as you go along, then you'll be able to withstand those knocks and make sure that you keep on track. The next point was around budgeting and kind of living within your means. This is so that you can make sure that you can set aside some money for your big goals each month. We went through kind of the time period to look at when you budget, and kind of how to look at the kind of outputs that go through that process. And then the final point was around protection. There we kind of ran through things like life protection, income protection, wills, and things like that, which are kind of another kind of area of foundations when it comes to your financial plan. So once you've kind of taken care of all those different areas, and you've got your emergency fund going, you've got your budget in place, and you've gone through kind of your debts and everything, that's when it's a good point in time to start looking at setting your target. And this section, and Peter's going to be taking us through this section. So over to you, Peter.
Okay, hi everyone. I guess I'd like to really stress that a key part of setting the target is actually making sure that you're setting a realistic target. That's above all critical to the whole journey and the way you feel as you go through this whole experience. So setting your target must be realistic. The next thing is just to Vivek, if you could just move the slide deck on a second, just to understand a few terms. In the investment world, you'll quite often hear people talking about the medium to long term as being 5 years plus, shall we say, and maybe long term being 15 years plus. The mortgage and home buying experience is slightly different because typically the time periods are shorter. So when we talk about short term, I'm typically meaning probably you're looking at buying within the next year. Medium term might be within the next 2 years, say, and long term is probably a bit further off. And I think it's important to be patient with this because you will soon go through these different timescales. So if when you first work out your plan, it looks like you may be a few years away, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. It's just part of the journey. But as you go through it, you'll soon find that you will get closer to the date and more things that you have to be thinking about. Okay, so the first part, I guess, of understanding, making a realistic goal is to get into the interesting bit, which is about trying to work out how much you might be able to borrow and how much of the type of property that you might be looking for. So Vivek, if you could just move the slide on deck on a sec. Now, hopefully, from what Vivek said, you've all had a chance to actually look into our property calculator, which is designed to try and do a lot of the heavy lifting of the how much I might be able to buy as a property for you. But I think it's important to stress that this is the starting block. So the bits I'll be going through at this stage, you'll also see as we go further on, Joe will be taking you through how actually it might have initially indicated this, but there are some other things you could be considering. Okay, so had a question there, Dan, saying, do you know where I can find it? Hopefully you can repost the link up again. But what I'd like you to do is to just spend a little bit of time. It's really easy. I don't think I'm probably going to need to explain how it works. It's probably more just getting to it. But if you could go to the app, put in your details. There's a questions there about your monthly outgoings and where you want to live, how many bedrooms. Doesn't matter too much. It's just to give you a feel so that it will tell you approximately the type of figures that you could be looking at. And what I'd also like you to do is we've got a poll that was coming up that was also designed to ask a very simple question. Is it about what you're expecting? Is it a bit less than you're expecting or a bit more than you're expecting? Okay, so maybe if you could, we'll give, it's that easy. I think we probably only need 2 or 3 minutes at the most, okay, for you to go through that and then just give us a feel for it, okay?
Yeah, Peter, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to launch the poll now. So as soon as people have finished working out their stuff in the tool, just fill in the poll, and we'll keep track of where people have got to.
The question with your monthly outgoings at this moment in time, it's very difficult to give a detailed answer to this, but what I would say is try and use the figure that is roughly how much you spend in total per month. So if for example, you've got 1,200 coming in and you spend about 800, put in the 800 into there. You'll find as you go through the whole home buying journey, you're starting to regularly review these things anyway, and you'll start to see, well, I might be able to save a bit here, or I might have to cut back my saving for a bit because I've got something happening in the time period. It's all perfectly normal stuff. Okay.
So we've had around half our attendees, or 60% of our attendees have now voted. Just wait for a little while longer.
Yeah. And by the way, there's not a right and a wrong answer as to whether it's expected or roughly. It's really just to get a feel for where people maybe were expecting to be against where they actually are. And as I said, this is an initial ready reckoner for your approximate amount you should be able to borrow in good conditions, shall we say.
Okay, we've had nearly 90% of people have voted now. It's only been up for a minute. Well, it's been 2 minutes now. Let me end it in, I'll give it another 10 seconds and then end it.
Okay.
Right, there we go. We've had over 90% of people answer now. So here we go. Can you see that, Peter?
Not yet. I've seen it.
Okay. So the majority of the responses were answered B. So 57% of people were answered B, which is yes, it was roughly what I expected. And then 26% of people, so about a quarter, answered A, no, it was less than I expected. And 17% of people, so nearly a fifth, answered no, it was more than I expected. Okay, well that's kind of what I would have expected. There are reasons why it might be less than expected, and that can be to do with any debt, for example, that people have currently got. Also, it could be slightly more depending upon just the basis of how this calculator is worked on sort of, should we say, not averages as such, but there are scenarios where you could lend more than a mortgage lender would lend more than the calculator is currently estimating. Okay, so I'm not surprised by that at all. Okay, could you move this slide on? Okay, sure thing. Okay, thank you. Okay, so when it comes to setting the target, you've really got to understand that there is three main things that you need to be thinking about. You've got how much you might be able to borrow, as in the mortgage side, okay? You've then got the total, how much you might be able to save between hopefully now and when you are targeting to buy the property. And then you've got other sources of savings, which might be gifts from parents or grandparents, that type of thing. And we're not sitting here assuming that people get all of these things. It's, you know, some people do, some people don't. So they're the three, the X plus Y plus Z, that gives you your target property price. But in reality, there are other costs to obviously buying a property, and they will include valuation fees, potentially surveyor fees. There's the dreaded legal fees, which we can't get away from. And then for some people, there might be moving fees as well. And it's very difficult to say to you that there's an average, because there isn't really. But I guess I could tell you that from my experience, valuation fees can range from as low as a mortgage lender saying they're going to pay it for you, okay, through to upwards to say £1,500 and possibly more if you need to have surveyors doing work as well. Okay, so but that's the type of figure I would be saying, that you're either 150 quid, maybe up as high as 1,500. But it's worth noting that if you are buying, say, like a period cottage that's a listed building, then your valuation fees and the costs that you might involve with that are likely to be more than if you were buying, should we say, off plan, for example. Okay, so there's those fees. Legal fees, again, these can vary, and I'm sure Joe may be closer to this to me, but my experience again shows that typically around 800, 850 up to about £1,500, even more possibly. Joe, I don't know if you have got a view.
I'd say so. It depends on whether or not you're using any schemes or anything like that. But yeah, legal fees can vary depending on things like the valuation of the property, how many of you there are, leasehold, freehold. There's a number of factors, but that's a good bracket.
Is a ballpark figure
Yeah.
to go by. And then you've got moving fees. Now, for some people, that might be absolutely nil. It's just that I'm walking out the one door that I live, say, with my parents, and I'm just going into the new property. Or it might be that you're actually moving from one place to another, a rented property, into your new home. And again, one man and his van, should we say, hiring a van might cost you about £300, should we say? And you'll want some friends, and also maybe up as high as £1,000 if you're looking at asking somebody to come in and packing everything for you and taking it over and unpacking. And again, that can go up even higher. It's all about what service do you want. But the key message there is you've got some additional costs to the property itself. So if we come back to the way the calculator was working, okay, with your budget, what it was doing, it was broadly taking your salary and it was multiplying it by 4.5 times. That was how it was working, okay? And that is working on the basis that your debt is virtually nil, okay? So any debt that you have does impact on your mortgage. And I don't want to go into the mortgages in detail at this point, because that's actually for another session. But the principle is it's taking your gross salary and timesing it by 4.5. And that's giving you an approximate upper end of what you might be able to borrow if all things are good. Now, there's a thing called a loan to value. So it's not like in this scenario here of somebody with 40,000, it's saying, right, I've got £180,000 mortgage. That is dependent upon you having a deposit to put down. And that is usually linked. And we have a thing called a loan to value. And basically, if we take a common loan to value of 90%, if you could borrow as much as 180,000, with a 90% loan to value, you'd have to put down another 20,000 against a property of 200,000. Okay, so that's how that works again. But again, don't assume that you're going to borrow the maximum that you can borrow, right? Because your savings capacity is absolutely key here. Okay, it can be the difference between either you not needing to borrow as much as you want, as you thought, to get the property you wanted, or of course it could mean, oh, actually I can save more, take a bit longer, and then I can get a property that's got the extra bedroom, or it's got the drive that I ideally wanted. So those facts come in. But so your total borrowing capacity we've covered. Your savings capacity is your disposable income, really, or the amount you're prepared to save on a, typically I've used a monthly basis here, but if you get paid weekly, it might be weekly, weekly for some people, it doesn't matter. But the principle is that you're trying to save on a regular basis over the time period you're happy to save for to get the property you're looking for. In this instance, that was 18,000. You then add in some extra savings that you might already have. And in this case, it meant our total savings capacity is 30,000. In this scenario, again, I've put in a gift from parents and grandparents, but the total, when you add them all up together, your budget's about 217,500 in this scenario. Bear in mind that we might want to say, put aside 5,000 in this to cover the legals and the surveyors, those bits. That means somebody could be looking at properties around about 210 to 212,000-ish. That's how you're starting to define your target. Okay. Now, the good bit with that is that you can then start to take that and start thinking to yourself, right, okay, where do I then start looking? Right. And we're going to cover that in a different session in a bit more detail. This is very much more about the money side, should we say. Okay. So we now know how much we're targeting. Okay. We've got a rough idea as to how much we might be able to save per month. But have you noticed how I deliberately told you to not worry too much about how much you put into the tool? And that's because at this point, we haven't actually gone through in detail the budgeting plan, okay, which we spoke about last time. right? But it would be at this time you would be doing that exercise and making sure that you can feel comfortable with how much you might be able to save on a regular basis. Okay, so Vivek, did you want to move the?
Yeah. Before we move on, I was actually going to ask a question to Joe. Actually, on this on X, which is the kind of salary multiple.
Yeah.
Kind of what range have you tended to see for first-time home buyers? I know we kind of use 4.5, which is kind of a industry rule of thumb. And have you seen any kind of major movements in the kind of multiples you've been seeing in recent months or trends around that?
Yeah, so more so in the negative way, if I'm honest. So when you start getting things like loans and credit cards, that 4.5 times does soon start to go down and down. So yeah, loans and credit cards can be a big thing, but there are also some lenders, depending on income, that can lend 5.5 times income too, depending on your circumstances. So yeah, 4.5 is a good kind of base, but that's why really you should speak to like a broker, just to make sure that your figures are completely accurate when you're making your plan.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So
Right, I'm going to move on.
Move that on, which actually links in quite nicely to the making of the plan. I guess to me, I get my bee in the bonnet a little bit about plans, so I apologize for that in advance. And if maybe you could just move the slide on, Vivek, and it's all to do with the definition of what a financial plan is. And broadly, in simple terms, any plan is a set of actions that takes you from A to B. That's what it is in simple terms. And I could sit here and say, right, okay, then in that example I said before, person's got £375 per month and they're just going to save it for X number of years, takes them from A to B. It's okay, but it's not what I call a great plan. And a great plan's got much more substance to it. And Vivek's just about to explain that with the next slide.
Yep.
Right, okay. It does the same thing, but the important thing is that you've got to properly assess where you are. And this is why I'm going back to what we spoke about last week, when the budgeting is so key, and about that you assess your current position accurately, but then also take into account any changes that you foresee moving forward. It's not just a rear view mirror, oh, that's what I spent last year, so that's what I'm going to spend this year. It's not. Good plan is taking into account change that's likely to happen. Okay? It also makes sure that it's defined, the goal is defined properly and it's achievable. So there's no point in thinking you're on, say, a salary of £15,000 a year and thinking, right, I'm going to be able to borrow 200,000. Reality is, on that simple scenario, that's not likely to happen. Okay, not unless you've got lots of gifts from the family, etc., etc. But from a mortgage perspective, you wouldn't be able to borrow that amount of money. So it's important that it's properly assessed and properly defined. The final bit, which really makes what I'd call a great plan, is one where you've built in some contingency for things that might go wrong. And these are the bits that we were talking about last week, where we were talking about having an emergency fund. So if something happened, it doesn't directly impact too much on your plans for your home buy. So that to me is sort of the good financial plan. But the simple part of it is doing that budgeting exercise, working out how much you have got available to help you towards your goal. And that's then when you need to start the next part, which is really starting the saving. Okay. And at this point, okay, could you just move the slide on, Vivek? Okay. I'm going to pass you over to Vivek.
Thanks, Peter. So we've over the last year or so, we've been helping thousands of our customers building up their deposit. Via our app, you can kind of go through what we went through just now, which is around kind of setting your targets, and within that you can kind of adjust like how much you want to be saving each month and kind of your timeframes and all that kind of stuff. And then we get straight into kind of building that amount up. And from kind of helping kind of our thousands of customers and kind of speaking to them around kind of what works best, there are three things that we wanted to share with you today in terms of our top tips. And the first is very simple. It is just start, just get going. It's so easy to kind of procrastinate. And I'd say this is probably one of the most important things that we kind of tell people. Even if it's as small as £1, it doesn't even matter where you put it. Like even if you put it in a kind of jam jar on the side or whatever it is, and it isn't earning much, it's so important just to get started. Once you get started, you kind of prove to yourself that you can set money aside, and it's like a really strong point to kind of build kind of a habit from. Emotionally, you'll feel just better for having done something towards something that you want. And psychologically, you've kind of won that kind of first part of the battle. Like you've started to put savings aside towards your home versus like other things you could be spending that money on. So that's our kind of first tip, and that kind of leads in quite nicely into kind of habit formation. So one of the things that we've seen, it's almost like a really powerful predictor for success when it comes to growing your wealth over the long term and kind of achieving goals, is building the right financial habits. And there's been quite a lot of research. There's been this great book, that's one of my favorite books out there, around habit formation. It's called Atomic Habits by someone named James Clear. And there's like a number of kind of principles that are very relevant to kind of building great habits in the world of finance. So the first is kind of starting with an incredibly small habit. It's making it so easy that you can't say no. So this is coming back to like just getting started, even if it's with a pound, even if it's with roundups and things like that, which you can do in our app. The second is around social proof. So this is where you tell someone about your goal, and then they can then help hold you to it. They can help hold you to account. So they can say, okay, they're like, you're kind of saving towards your first home. How are you doing towards that? And kind of catch up with how you're progressing. The next is kind of sticking with it and being patient. It's, often it's quite easy to start goals, but kind of sticking with it is the bit that then gets quite difficult. And I'm going to come on to like the next kind of top tip we have, which really helps with that. And then the final is just the kind of, if you do slip, it's fine. Like, don't feel too guilty about it. But James Clear has this kind of motto of never missing twice. So, you might have a difficult month or whatever it is, but then put in that extra effort of kind of getting back on track the following month. And I've just taken out a quote here around, success when it comes to like big goals. It's just a few very simple disciplines practiced every day, whilst failure is simply a few errors in judgment repeated every day. So just making sure you get into that habit and repeat it is super important. Luckily, technology helps us with that. So, a really smart way of making a habit or forming a habit and making it kind of work in the background for you is just to automate it. This is something that we've seen help a lot of people. There's a number of different ways you can automate your savings. The things that we've seen help people a lot are to kind of automatically move money when they get paid. That around 60 or 70% of our customers kind of have payments going towards their goals around when their paydays are, and it kind of goes well with this whole kind of principle of paying yourself first, or putting money towards your goals before putting your money towards other things around you. And a really good example of how automating great financial habits have worked really well here in the UK are with people's pensions. So most of our customers have workplace pensions. This is a really good example of where payments have been automated. You kind of pay yourself first, you pay your pension first before money hits your account. And it's been a huge success here in the UK, where I think the latest numbers are over 90% of people who've been set up with these pensions are kind of paying into it. And then finally, it's all around using the right products. And this is where in the UK, first-time home buyers are very lucky. there are a couple of products out there where you get government bonuses. The government here in the UK wants to incentivize people saving towards their first home and wants to help people get onto the housing ladder. And there are two major products that you can use out of the Lifetime ISA and the Help to Buy ISA. Out of the two, the Lifetime ISA is still available to open today, whereas the Help to Buy ISA is a product that was available to people until about a year ago, but some people still kind of have it open. I think what's really important to note about Lifetime ISAs and Help to Buy ISAs is that you can have both, but you can only use government bonuses from one of them when you go on to kind of buy your property. So that's something really important to keep in mind. And in terms of like the benefits you get, so I'm gonna run through the different types of benefits. So for Lifetime ISAs, the big benefit you get is a 25% government bonus. And there's an annual limit to how much you can put in. So you can put up to £4,000 per tax year. And that means your max government bonus each year is £1,000. And if you're buying with someone, if you're buying in a couple, that means you can make up to £2,000 of government bonuses each year towards your home buying goal, which is pretty chunky, actually. Bonus payments are paid each month at the kind of end of each month. But it's also important to note that you have to be between the ages of 18 and 39. There are limits or restrictions around how much your property is worth. And you need to have had your Lifetime ISA open for at least 12 months after opening it in order to use the bonus towards buying your first home. When it comes to Help to Buy ISAs, a really common question we have coming in is like, we've got a number of customers who already have a Help to Buy ISA, and they're kind of asking whether they should continue using that Help to Buy ISA or to use a Lifetime ISA instead. The key things to note are around how much they have in the Help to Buy ISA already, and whether they want to kind of use the bonus in that versus kind of transferring it to a Lifetime ISA or using a Lifetime ISA instead. It's also really important to figure out like how far out you are from buying your first property, because if it's going to be within 12 months, then it's not worth opening up a Lifetime ISA. I don't know whether there's anything else you wanna add on that, Peter or Dan? Okay, I'm going to move on to the Lifetime ISA we recommend then. So here at Multiply.
Sorry, Vivek, I did the usual thing of being on mute. I knew I'd do it. I just wanted to stress the point you said about joint. If you're a couple doing it, you both have to be first-time buyers to be able to use Lifetime ISA or Help to Buy towards it. But that doesn't prevent you. So if one of you is a first-time buyer and the other one isn't, doesn't prevent you. All right, okay.
Great. So there is a LISA product that we recommend here at Multiply. It's not our own LISA, Lifetime ISA. It's one provided by a company called Unity Mutual, who've been around for over 200 years. They're a mutual company, so they're not a bank. And that means that their product is not a cash Lifetime ISA. It's classified as a stocks and shares Lifetime ISA, but it still pays a fixed rate. And the rate is 1.5%, which is higher than all the other Lifetime ISAs out there in the market. And it has been guaranteed for the whole tax year. And the reason why we picked the Unity Mutual one to recommend to all of our customers is that it simply pays the highest rate, but it also comes with unlimited FSCS protection. And if you open it through Multiply, then you can also get a £20 welcome bonus, which with the government 25% bonus ends up being £25. Right. So those are our top tips when it comes to saving up your deposit. I'm now going to hand over to Joe to kind of run through what you can kind of do if you've gone through the goal setting, you're kind of going through building up your deposit, but you're struggling to kind of afford what you really want to afford. So yeah, Joe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vivek. So yeah, it's very, very frustrating when you decide that buying is right for you. You run through all the figures and then find out that you can't afford to do it. So there's three things that you can do to help in this situation. So the first thing is adjust your target. Second, boost your buying power and explore different ways to buy as well. So if we just move on to the next slide, please, Vivek.
Sure.
Okay, so let's talk about adjusting your target. So how can we do that? So a big thing is compromising. And the main areas that you can compromise are looking at your list of must-haves. Is there anything on there that could be adjusted slightly? For example, if you're looking for a property with a garage, could you maybe set it with a driveway instead? Alternatively, the type of property. So it's crazy how much values can differ depending on the type of the property. Even switching from like an end terrace to a mid terrace, you can save thousands depending on where you live. So that's a big thing. Location. So I'm in Plymouth, and properties that are literally less than a 10-minute walk away from one another can be like £100,000 more expensive. In places like London, it could potentially be even more. So, could you consider a town maybe on the outskirts, commute to work? It might be worthwhile looking at slightly further afield sometimes. And timescale. So if all the options above have been exhausted, then really it comes down to patience. It might just be a case of waiting until you've saved up a little bit more deposit, or maybe waiting until your next kind of annual pay rise, or until you've got somebody else that can go on the mortgage with you. Those are the main things. If we could just move across onto the next one. So boosting your buying power. How can we do that? So there's three main ways of doing that. First of all, it's paying off any debts that you have. So last time we did a bit of an example about how much difference paying off loans and credit cards can potentially make to how much you can borrow. Once these are paid off, you'll also be able to save quicker as you'll have less outgoings too. Next is increase your income. So more income can mean a larger mortgage. Second jobs can be a great way to do this, although many lenders will want to see you being in that second position for a certain length of time. But even the increasing income by itself can also help with saving towards your deposit, because you'll have more income coming in. And the third way is decreasing your outgoings. So have a look through your bank statements, check to see how much you're spending, and see if there's any areas that you can maybe cut back. I know lots of us are addicted to things like online shopping, trips to Starbucks, things like that, but try to limit any unnecessary spending where possible. It could even be things like finding somewhere cheaper to rent, or moving back with parents, if possible. Okay, next slide. So different ways to buy. There's three main ways to buy for first-time buyers at the moment. Buying just buying normally, but these ways you can potentially increase the amount that you can buy at. So buying jointly or using the bank of mum and dad, this will show increased household income, and the lender will also be happy as there's now more than one person on the mortgage. If you're living with the other person, they can also share the monthly costs. Help to buy. So this is specifically for new builds. The government will provide an equity loan of up to 20% or 40% in London. This is interest-free for the first 5 years, and you only need 5% deposit for this scheme too. And finally, shared ownership. So with shared ownership, you buy a share of the property between 10 and 75%. It was 25 to 75, but they recently changed that. So 10% to 75% of the property value. You'll then pay rent on the share that you don't own. It's really, really good for households with maybe a lower income, and this can be used on newer properties or older, they're called resale properties with shared ownership. If we go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so let's do an example of buying jointly or buying with, bank of mum and dad. So John is buying on his own, first of all. He has an annual salary of £30,000, car finance of £350 a month, and a credit card balance of 3,000, which is pretty standard, pretty normal. Potentially, he'll be able to borrow 125,000. Sorry, he'll be able to borrow 112,950. So with a 10% deposit of 12,550, you could potentially buy up to 125,500. So with example 2, he decides to buy now with his partner Kate, just to kind of boost affordability. Katie has a lower income of 22,000, but doesn't have any debt. So the potential mortgage amount in this scenario is 220,500, With a 10% deposit on that, they can now buy up to 245,000. So it's like worlds apart, completely different. Quick note, if you do go down the bank of mum and dad route, one of them kindly decides to maybe go on the mortgage with you, this may mean that you have to have a slightly shorter mortgage term due to their age, which will then in turn mean higher monthly payments, but less interest. So swings and roundabouts. If we could go on to the next slide.
Joe, just before that, there are a couple of people on our Q&A who are asking whether we're going to brush on the first home scheme.
Oh yeah, we can do actually. So that's I put a little post on that one on my Instagram today, and it's specifically for new builds, and they're only releasing, I think, like 1,000 this year, but next year and the years after, they want to be releasing 10,000 of these new homes kind of every year under this scheme. So it's only going to be with certain developers in certain areas, and what they're going to do is provide a 30% to 50% discount on those properties. And the way that that will work is you have to be a first-time buyer, and when you sell the property, that discount then rolls over to the next first-time buyer. So it has to be a first-time buyer that then buys it off you with the same level of discount. So things to think about with that are, it might make it a little bit harder to sell the property when you do come to move, purely because you have to have a first-time buyer and you have to have that discount. So, you know, if the market changes a little bit and, you know, it's a little bit harder to sell, that's something to maybe consider. But yeah, it looks like a good scheme. It does look good.
Great. Thanks, now moving on.
Cool. Okay. So Help to Buy. This is very, very popular. Recently changed slightly recently. Was for first-time buyers and home movers, now specifically for first-time buyers only. So if John and Kate now decide to buy a new build using the Help to Buy scheme, their borrowing potential does slightly increase. So they can now afford a property up to 262,800, and this is because they have the combination of the mortgage from the lender plus the 20% equity loan in this scenario, and they're also only using the 5% deposit required for this scheme too. Okay, and next we have shared ownership. So with shared ownership, John and Katie have found a property offering a 50% share. We'll stick to 50% for this kind of demonstration. So their share is worth 187,500, and the mortgage is 168,750, and they have a 10% deposit. So the attraction of this is that the property total value is 375,000, which you can see is worlds apart from any other scheme. So just to compare, we had 125,500 with just John, 245,000 buying together but not using any schemes, you know, kind of like an older property, 262,800 using Help to Buy, and finally 375,000 using shared ownership. So yeah, you can potentially get a lot more property for the income. Personally, I think shared ownership should be a last resort. Purely because you don't own 100% of the property and are paying rent on the share that you don't own. I mean, it's still getting you on the ladder technically, but not as effectively as owning the entire home or using one of the other schemes. It's more suited for people that are really struggling with affordability and, you know, on the other purchasing methods. So that's my thoughts. Staying on track. So yeah, I'm going to hand off to Peter now to go through the next slides. I hope you found that useful. And if you have any questions, I'll keep an eye on the Q&As too. Thank you.
Yeah, Joe, I was going to have a quick question.
Go for it.
Which is going to be around, like, have you in the past helped people with any of these schemes, and then once have then kind of purchased the properties on those schemes? Like, what's their experience been like? Has it been positive, or have there been kind of issues that have arisen afterwards? Or
yeah, so I've done all of the schemes apart from first homes because it's not really out in my area yet. So if we go through them, buying normally, you know, brilliant. You know, it is what it is. You buy an older property, and generally there's very little that can go wrong. As long as it's affordable, no problem at all. Help to Buy, very, very good. You just have to stress that, you know, the equity loan is interest free for 5 years. After that, you do start paying interest on it. The perks of buying a new build too, you know, everything's brand new. You get a 10-year warranty. So, people really do feel the excitement with buying it, a new build, moving into it, and making it their own. So that is very exciting. Shared ownership, again, very, very exciting, because usually it means that people are kind of getting onto the ladder, or it means that somebody has maybe split up with a partner or had like a family breakdown and they've had to downsize, and the only way that they've been able to do that is through shared ownership. So it gives them an opportunity to kind of start over. So that's always really nice. And I think the main thing is all of these people are just usually buying their first house, so regardless of how they do it, it's such an exciting experience. And I can't really think of any personal downsides to any of the applications that I've submitted through any of them. So I know that you do hear kind of horror stories about rents and things going up, but I haven't personally experienced that yet.
Perfect. Thanks, Jay.
No worries.
Peter, you okay with this slide or the next slide?
He's on mute.
You're on mute, Peter. Sorry.
Twice in one session, I get brownie points on that. I just wanted to reiterate what Joe just said there about you're buying your home. It's an enjoyable experience, or should be an enjoyable experience. It will have its moments, of course it will, and I'm sure we'll point some of those out when you get into certain parts of the process itself. But the key bit is enjoy it and accept that sometimes you're gonna have your bad months where you don't quite keep to your budget that you'd intended to. It doesn't matter, okay? What you just need to do is, as Vivek said earlier, just get back on the horse and think, okay, just move on, keep going. What we do tend to find, though, is if people are regularly not achieving the goal that they've set themselves, it probably means there's something in the budget that needs relooking at. And so the important bit here is to regularly review your budget. Now that is going to do one or two things. It's either going to allow you to correct a reason why maybe you haven't been quite achieving the original plan, or also what it might actually highlight to you is actually I might be able to increase my savings. And it's quite surprising how once you start to see the savings build, the motivation builds, and then the 3 lattes a day suddenly becomes 2 lattes because you're sitting there thinking I could save a bit more. So that's a key part of it. Reviewing the plan regularly. Aside from that, staying on track really it's a bit boring. It's I've got paid, can I save a bit more? Have I saved as much as I intended to? If not, review. I think one of the bits that I would say, though, is that from my experience is, Vivek said it earlier about pay yourself first. And it really is true, because there's lots of statistics that shows if you pay yourself first and save, you tend to reach your goal faster than the person who says, well, I'll save what I'm left with at the end of the month. I can guarantee you'll get there quicker saving for, even if some months you have to dip into what you've just saved, you will get there quicker by doing it. I've also seen that direct debit, fixed regular savings when you get paid, coupled with ad hoc maybe spends towards the end of the month when you realize you've got a bit more left than you thought, that also works well. And as Vivek said earlier, there are these sort of roundup facilities that weren't around when I bought my first property, but I can certainly see the advantage of how they can look after the pennies, the pounds look after themselves, is the phrase. The other part to sort of getting ready is actually now starting to work on making yourself look more attractive to lenders. I can see we've had a question already on that type of area, and getting yourself mortgage ready. Now, those two we are going to be delving into in the next session in a lot more detail. But really, I'd sort of, and maybe if you could just move on a slide, Vivek, that's really the key part of the next session, is how to set yourself up for mortgage approval. That's not to say we aren't going to answer the questions that have been raised, of course, but this is the rest of the lineup. Next week, we've got mortgage success, finding the one the week after that, and then finally sealing the deal itself. So that's pretty much the end of the deposit and setting the target session. other than to leave it open for questions and answers. And I can see we have got some here that we've said that we'll answer in this session. So let's have a look. So the first one says, if you use government support for childcare, does that affect your attractiveness to mortgage lenders? Now, that's a great question to palm off to Joe to answer, being a mortgage broker. Joe, anything to add?
I have got something to add to that, actually. I remember an application I did probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was a lovely lady that, again, it was due to a relationship kind of breakdown, and her income, she worked part-time, I think on around kind of 12,500 a year, but a lot of her income was made up of things like child benefit, child tax credits, child maintenance she'd received. And lenders were more than happy to consider that kind of income, because it was seen as an income that was going to continue, pretty much throughout, or the majority of the of the mortgage term. So income to do with childcare, disability, anything like that, any additional kind of income on top of earned income, depending on where it is, as long as it's legal, can be potentially used for mortgage purposes. Okay,
so hopefully that's answered that question. Next one here, I've got something to say, and I suspect Joe may have a view as well, and sometimes with advisors you find that advice is advice, and there are sometimes different views and different aspects to it. But this one says, if we have a £30,000 deposit and offer it's a £240,000 property, so in other words, could put 24,000 down, would you recommend just putting down the 10% deposit and then overpay on monthly mortgage payments, or would you put down the larger chunk in the first place? Now, I would give my financial advisor aspect to this. The first thing that would spring to my mind would be emergency fund. So what I wouldn't recommend you do is go and put the full 30,000 into the property if that leaves you with only your credit card as being your potential source of funds for emergencies. But as a principle of would I put the lump sum down the higher amount, on the assumption that you had the an emergency fund in place and you weren't potentially going to get a worse deal. I can't see how you would, but unless you were potentially going to get a worse deal, putting the 30 down sounds to me the right way to go. But Joe, I don't know if you've got any sort of other aspects. Usually you find there are various different ways of considering these things.
Yeah, so Peter touched on this earlier, loan to value. So with loan to values, lenders tend to change their interest rates and products every 5% that you have. So 5% deposit, 10%, 15%, 20%. With 30,000 deposit, you're still within that kind of 10% bracket. So you're not going to gain necessarily anything from the interest rate by putting down that extra money. If you could raise that to 36,000, then that would put you in a 15% deposit bracket, which then could potentially open you up to more preferential products, rates. So my advice normally is put down as big a deposit as possible, because you will pay less interest. But when you think about loan to values as well, and that's just assume that you do have an emergency fund in place and you do have all the fees and everything sorted, then it's not paramount to use that money for the deposit. And what you could do is overpay, like you've mentioned, but also think about things like furnishings for the property. It's not cheap to kit a house out these days. So yeah, just something else, another little angle to think about there with that one.
Yeah, and I guess what the bit to remember with it is whatever you do with it, if you're putting it into the property itself, you are making it illiquid, and that's that bit of money becomes illiquid to you. It might be saving you interest, obviously, and that's the advantage of doing it. But so I think what I take there from Joe is that yes, there's an interest saving, but actually it might be worth just putting that alongside whether there's a potential for a better deal as a result of doing it or not, in which case there's maybe less benefit. Okay. Right, next one says, push this to the mortgage session if more appropriate. I have enough for a 10% deposit under the LISA limit and enough for a 5% deposit under that limit. By the time my income increases to the level needed to get the mortgage, my total might be up to 20%. I'd like to keep some money outside of property, but is the additional interest for a 95% mortgage stroke reduced interest for an 80% mortgage enough to make a larger mortgage preferable? Understand the question, Joe?
Not really.
No.
Not really. I think I just go back to my original point that if you've got the funds there that can be used and allocated towards the deposit, you know, as long as you have your emergency fund and other fees in place, then the more deposit you can put down into the property, the better. 95% products aren't overly competitive. They're really, really tight on things like credit ratings. They're very, very difficult to get. If you can boost it to a higher deposit, I would recommend it.
Okay, so I take that the question was broadly saying, it was asking, am I better off getting a lower interest rate and put more into it?
That's what I got from it. That's what I got.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's great. There's another question here. I just have to scroll down and see. Hypothetically, if you buy a first home through the first home scheme, are you able to buy another second home down the line? Asked based on the rule that the home bought through first home needs to be your main residence.
Good one.
It is a good question. I guess my question would be, if you're buying a second home, I'm assuming that wouldn't be your main residence by default. That would be either a holiday let or buy to let or a holiday home of some shape or form. I think the answer from me is there's probably need to understand more of the detail of the first home scheme before I would be happy giving you a concrete answer to that, Joe. I feel the same, or?
Yeah, so with most government schemes, especially ones that help first-time buyers out, there's usually bits in there to say that that's the only home that you're allowed to own. Okay. So things like shared ownership, you can't rent it out, you can't buy a buy-to-let whilst owning it, help to buy, same thing. I imagine it's going to be the same with this, but I haven't seen any, finer details. But I doubt very much they're going to give you the discount and then just let you buy a buy-to-let in the background after that. It's going to be unlikely, I'd say.
Okay, and the same person, I think. How much savings on top of the deposit do you guys recommend to have ready to go in order to face whatever extra fees we may face in buying our first home? I guess I'm not sure whether you were there right at the beginning. It doesn't matter, but broadly, you've got valuation fees, potentially surveyor fees, and the core difference between there being the valuation fee is very much for the lender's benefit of, is this property worth what I might be lending them? The surveyor's fees might be additional because you want to understand a bit more about the property, or possibly the valuation has come out saying we think this needs investigating because of, I don't know, subsidence in the area, just as an example. Not the best example maybe, but that good example would be what happened to me with a property where the valuation fee, they said, yeah, it's worth what it's what you're buying, but the loft, we're not sure whether that had full building regulations in place when it was bought, and therefore they wanted a surveyor to go in and to double check on that part of the property. Okay, but essentially you're talking valuation, roughly. It can range from freebie from the lender, possibly freebie from a developer, but it could go up as high as 1,500 maybe. Surveyor's fees, £200 to £600, depending upon what specifically they're being asked to do. Legal fees of a solicitor or conveyancer ranges from, again, you can get deals that will pay for some of these, but about 850, maybe up to 1,500, possibly more. And then moving fees themselves could be nothing, or could be hiring a van, maybe about £300. through to 1,000, 1,200 maybe, depending upon whether you want a removal company to be bubble wrapping everything that you've got that's moving over. Right. So if you take an average of that, you're talking, let's say maybe, I don't know, 500 for the valuer, let's say another 300 potentially surveyor, so that's 5,800 legals, let's say another 1,500, so 2,300 moving fees, let's say about 2,500. Okay, but if that's a buyer, and that's really with a bit of caveat there, because if your circumstances could mean that you're paying a lot less than that, or it could mean you're paying a lot more than that. And any insights into any averages at all, Joe, Vivek, on that?
Yeah, I'd say with mine, it generally works out around £2,500 with me. That's pretty much bang on. Yeah, I mean, I don't tend to go into things like removals quite so much. I just say, they might be other expenses such as removals, but yeah, £2,000 to £2,500 is generally the average.
Yeah, and from my experience, most first-time buyers, moving fees themselves are virtually nil, because they'll just do lots of car runs if it's local.
Yeah,
that's obviously another factor, the location of where you're buying against where you are now.
Absolutely.
Right, we've got some more questions in here. If you're getting a gifted deposit from parents, but probably not buying for 1 to 2 years, does this look worse to lenders than if you have the same deposit saved yourself to get it gifted earlier and keep in the bank? I almost want to defer that question to next week when we go into the mortgages a bit more, but then that wouldn't be fair on the question actually being asked. Joe, your thoughts again on that?
Won't make a difference at all. What I would recommend, though, is just keep evidence of that transaction taking place, just so it can be brought up and provided to the lender, just for their kind of money laundering processes. Yeah,
I think the bit I would add is you showing that you can save on a regular basis. That's probably the key bit for me. A lender being able to see you can save is an important part of it. Although, again, every lender has different criteria that they consider. Okay. What's the next one? Where is the best place to look for a financial mortgage advisor who can work out what our affordability is and actually give us advice without committing to a mortgage in principle? Also, how much would it typically cost to get this advice? We've spoken to someone at our LISA Building Society, but she wouldn't give us advice, only tell us hard, depressing facts. Okay, well, Joe,
Hey, come over
here's
here.
the answer.
Yeah, so with that, I'd be more than happy to help. And any advice for things like affordability, there's no cost for that. So yeah, if anyone wants any kind of affordability checks doing, then yeah, just get in contact with me and we can run through some figures. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, and yeah, sounds great. So how does it work with getting a mortgage to build? I have a LISA and so does my partner, with a total of 30,000 in them for a deposit, and would like to build a prefab home, which is often between 150 to 250k to build. Will lenders still lend to first-time homeowners if it's a build, or is it different? Now, that I'm going to put my hands up here and say I've not come across that at all, so I can't answer it. Joe?
Well, that's a hell of a question, that is. I like that one. And in fairness, I've never done a self-built mortgage for somebody that's also using a LISA either. So I'm going to say I don't see why that would be an issue, but I can't give you any hard answer for that one. I really need to look into that. But again, I don't see why that would be a problem. It would be a self-build mortgage. The way it works is some lenders will let you put down a deposit for the land, and then they release the mortgage at different stages of the build. So the self-build side of it's not a problem at all for a first-time buyer, but using the LISA bonus for that, I just need to check that one.
Yeah, one thing that springs to my mind there is that I would have expected that the LISA would have to be used at the very first loan.
Yeah.
What I would expect.
Yeah. So yeah, that's true. So you might be limited on the amount that can actually be used for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but we can look into that. not a
Well,
problem.
Rachel, I guess that's a question, a homework for us, and hopefully something we can try and address next week. Okay, so great question. I think we're sort of there, but it doesn't sound a professional answer yet. So please come back next week. Okay.
Oh, Dan's actually messaged, you can use the lifetime ISA to buy land for a self-built property as long as the purchase meets all the other criteria for property purchase through the scheme. So yeah.
Brilliant. And that's why everybody needs a Dan.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so thank you.
Dan the tech man.
Yes. Right. If moving to a different loan to value, e.g. 95 to 90% might take a long time, I take it you mean the market as a whole there, say 14 months. Oh, no, sorry. I mean,
No,
you're
it's saving.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Say 14 months. What should I consider in terms of buying now or buying later? Okay. So I take it, is there a question there around, you're thinking of house price movements, I think might be being posed there, or is it more a matter of actually I could buy the property I wanted now, it's just it will be a 95% mortgage?
See, the things that I would think about are, it depends on what your current circumstances are. For example, if you're currently renting and paying 800, 900,000 pounds a month on rent, you got to weigh up that amount that you're actually not really getting anything for compared to a slightly worse rate on the 95% mortgage deal in comparison to the 90%. You might be worth biting the bullet and doing it sooner rather than later. Whereas if you are living with parents, for example, and paying £100 a month and can quite happily save with little outgoings at all, then it might be worth waiting. There's other things to consider though. I mean, rates are so low at the minute. So it would be a real shame if you spent all that time saving up that extra 5% deposit and then rates go through the roof. Not that they necessarily would, but there's plenty, there's plenty of things to think about with that. But yeah, I'd say if you're renting and paying a high amount of rent each month, might be worth doing it sooner. If you're at home and can quite happily save up fairly quickly, then I would potentially consider waiting.
Yeah, I think this is the type of thing that in the past, when I've had these type of conversations with people, you have to sometimes just move away from the financials of it. And it's about, how do you feel? How important is it for you to get into that home, to be honest? It might be that you actually are absolutely itching to move, in which case, yes, you can argue the finances a different way, but it's a home you're buying. It's your first home, and never forget that that's ultimately what you're doing. And yes, you can look back at the financial aspects and say, well, if I'd done it this way, I could have been this. It's sort of, I've heard it a lot of the time where you're trying to get the perfection and actually try and focus on what it is you're buying, which is, it's not bricks and it is bricks and mortar, but it's a home. And those are the bits you need to sometimes say, I'm going to, as you said, bite the bullet, because it gives me that home that I'm really looking for.
Yeah.
So that'll be it.
It's a balance, isn't it? Definitely.
Yeah. I intend opting for the first home scheme and live there only for about 5 to 8 years. And I'm studying medicine, but will keep it. And after completing my studies, I will buy my permanent home. Would this affect me in the future? I think I know the answer to this one, Joe, but my reading of this, was, I thought that you said that you had to sell it on. So is this person going to be able to keep it and then buy a permanent home?
Again, I haven't seen the finer details, but because of the kind of restrictions that I can envisage with it, I don't think you'll be able to rent it out or keep it. I think what you'll have to do is sell it and then buy your permanent home. And what you could then potentially do is maybe don't use all of the equity that you put in when you do buy your new home. You could maybe split it and then put half towards the buy-to-let property and half towards your permanent home. But keeping that one for, in the background, I don't think you'll be able to.
Yeah, I get the sense. I mean, that one of the things that the government would definitely not be wanting to do is give people a cheap means of getting onto the buy-to-let.
Absolutely. Definitely.
So I'm convinced that you're right there, Joe, that it wouldn't be possible.
No.
If I want to renovate with my boyfriend and we want to borrow around 300 to 350,000 as a mortgage, but buy a property with a value of 180 to 220,000 and spend the rest on the renovation, will lenders let you have a larger amount than what the property is worth if you're renovating? Again, I'll let you answer it, Joe. I'm pretty
Right.
sure I know the answer, but you are the mortgage regulated advisor.
That's fine. So I get asked this question a lot, actually. So yeah, example, you find a house that's, you know, worth 200,000, but it needs a lot of work doing to it. So you'd like to borrow 300,000 to do the work, and that in turn will then boost the value of the property. And you know, when you say like that, it kind of makes sense. But if I give you an example, and let's say the property's worth £200,000, and the lender says, "Okay, no worries, we'll give you 300,000. Crack on, do the renovation." And day one, you don't pay your mortgage. Month two, you don't pay your mortgage. Month three, you don't pay your mortgage, and they have to repossess you. So what they have to do then is sell the property, probably at a bit of a loss, to recoup the money that they've lent you. Now, there's no way in hell they're going to get £300,000 back off the property you potentially haven't even started work on. So in answer to the question, no, they won't let you borrow more than what the property is worth. And that again comes down to the loan to value. So 5% deposit, 10% deposit, 15% deposit, the deposit, you know, in comparison with the value of the property. A little while ago, quite a few years ago, there was a lender that was doing kind of 125% mortgages. So what they would do is they'd have a mortgage and then kind of like a secured loan on top. And that was around the time things started getting a little bit sticky. So no, lenders are a lot more, a bit more safe now, and won't let you do that, unfortunately, in some respects. But yeah, I think it's sensible.
It's more likely that they'll say, you go and get a loan somewhere else, you know, and when you've done the work, remortgage, and we might lend you a bit more, depending on the value. Because there's also, you have to bear in mind that house values go down as well as up. And so your scenario that you just explained there, I mean, you could be in a position where the lenders lent you 300,000, and not only is the property worth 250, market's dropped by 10%, all of a sudden it's dropped 225 or even more. So lenders will always put themselves first, and you can't really blame them for that.
What's bitten?
Awesome. I think that's the questions done, actually, guys. So I think we'll we'll call it a wrap at that point. Thank you, everyone, for attending our second event, and hopefully see many of you next week at the same time for the next one. Cool. Thanks, everyone.